They didn't just take my job. They gutted my kitchen, my legacy, and served its bones on porcelain plates with sprigs of microgreens. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I walked out with my recipes in my head and a fire still smoldering in my chest. They thought I was finished. What they didn't know was that roots, once scorched, grow back stronger. And I had just the soil for resurrection. My name's Reed Navarro. I'm 41 years old, and until 2 months ago, I was head chef at Ember House, a rustic fine dining spot tucked behind an old brick storefront in Asheville, North Carolina. You wouldn't find it on any tourist map, but folks knew. For 8 years, I worked that line, turning a dying restaurant into a place where people came to taste memory. Not nostalgia, memory. Smoke-cured ribs, chow chow, vinegar-braised greens, biscuits the way my great-grandmother used to make ham on a wood stove in West Virginia. The food told stories. My stories. My family's. I still remember the first night we sold out of oxtail and white beans. I stood outside after closing, my apron crusted with flour, breathing in the cold mountain air like it was the first clean breath I'd taken in years. I'd put everything into that place, my savings, my reputation, my time. Built a team I trusted. Malik, my sous chef, started as a dishwasher. Cora, our pastry chef, could turn a cast-iron skillet into a symphony. We were a tight crew. Then came Jade Ellis. She was all high heels, leather portfolio, and tech startup money. Said she was a lifestyle investor. Bought out the previous owner in one quiet deal. No warning. No handshake. Just a Tuesday morning staff meeting where she smiled like a realtor and told us Ember House needed to be more modern. Her words, we're moving toward experiential dining. Foam. Fusion. Vibrant, social media forward energy. I stared at her like she'd spoken in Morse code. She didn't fire me. Just said we needed a new direction. So I packed up my knives that afternoon. Wrapped each one in cloth, tucked them in my roll. Walked out without a word. The kitchen never felt so cold. Malik stood by the walk-in, arms folded tight across his chest. He watched me roll up my apron, slow and methodical, like I was folding a flag. You are this restaurant, he said, barely above a whisper. I gave him a tired smile. Not anymore. He offered to help me carry my things out, but I waved him off. I needed to leave that place on my own 2 feet, alone, the same way I came in 8 years ago. That night, I ended up back at the old shotgun rental I'd lived in since before Ember House had a logo. Kitchen light buzzing like a dying firefly. I poured 3 fingers of whiskey and sat at the table with nothing but silence and the slow tick of the wall clock. It wasn't just a job I'd lost. It was history. Every plate that ever left that pass window carried pieces of my great-grandmother's hands, my grandfather's cast iron, my mama's Sunday apron stained with blackberry juice and bacon grease. I'd been trying to cook the way they lived, slow, soulful, with care that couldn't be rushed. And I never wrote the recipes down. Not the real ones. There were versions on paper, sure, quantities, ingredients, the kind of things health inspectors like to see. But the truth? The flavor wasn't in the measurements. It was in the way you let the pot sit just a hair past where most folks would pull it off. It was the sound the greens made when the vinegar hit, the smell of cornmeal browning in bacon drippings. The tiny things. Things you feel, not read. I opened the drawer where I kept my grandmother's recipe book. Mostly blank pages now. Just a few yellowed index cards she wrote when her hands still worked right. I ran my fingers over one labeled chicken and dumplings, for company. No measurements. Just lines like, till it feels right, and, should smell like Sundays. I sat there until the bottle was near empty and the street outside went quiet. A recipe forgotten, maybe. But not gone. Not yet. 2 weeks after I walked out of Ember House, I heard Jade had flown in some hotshot executive chef from San Francisco. Name was Nico something. Wore designer aprons, cooked with tweezers. Word around town was he called collards, bitterness-forward greens, and swapped out cornbread for millet crackers. I tried not to care. But I did. I'd stop by Grady's Hardware just to hear the local gossip. They put foam on the trout, one old-timer grumbled. Tasted like lemon soap. A blog review called it a confused echo of greatness. That one stung more than I thought it would. Then one evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Malik standing there, holding a six-pack and wearing that same beat-up hoodie he always wore when he had something serious on his mind. "You free?" he asked. I just stepped aside and let him in. We sat on the porch drinking room temp beer, the kind you don't notice going warm when the conversation's heavy. He finally said it. "Let's bring back the Ember Grill." I laughed at first. Not because it was funny, just because it felt impossible. That place had been closed since my granddad died. Boarded up, dust settling thick as flour on the counter. "It's just a ghost now," I said. Malik looked me square in the eye. "So bring it back to life." We didn't say much after that. He left around midnight, and I found myself back at the kitchen table, flipping through my grandfather's old recipe book. It was more journal than cookbook, ink smudged, grease stains, a fingerprint pressed into a corner like he'd marked it with his soul. One page caught my eye. It didn't even have a title. Just one sentence, scribbled in faded blue ink. "Good food remembers." That stuck with me. I didn't have money. I didn't have a plan. But I had that phrase. And maybe, just maybe, I still had enough left to make something grow from what had burned down. I stood out front of the old building for a long time before unlocking the door. The sign still read the Ember Grill, letters faded, rust trailing down from the bolts like old tears. I ran my hand along the chipped frame and whispered, "Let's see if you still remember." I didn't want to recreate Ember House. That was gone, and maybe it needed to be. This place, it had to be more than just a comeback. It had to be a return. So I started from the roots. First thing I made was collard greens with smoked turkey neck. I stood there in that dusty kitchen, watching the pot bubble like it was breathing again. Then came the cornbread, cast iron, golden, brushed with sorghum just before the crust finished crisping. I could almost hear my grandmother humming as she moved around me. Malik showed up a few days later, dragging in an old fridge he'd found on Craigslist. "It's ugly," he said, "but it runs cold." We cleaned, we painted, we scraped grease from decades ago off the backsplash. I found one of my grandfather's old biscuit cutters buried in a drawer. Held it like it was a relic. We weren't chasing trends. We were chasing memory. And then, like a bad smell you thought you'd left behind, came the letter. Thick envelope. Fancy gold seal. Jade's attorney. She was invoking a non-compete clause from my old contract. Said I couldn't open another, competing establishment, within 10 miles of Ember House. I didn't panic. I called my cousin Laurel. She'd been a contract lawyer for 12 years and didn't mince words. She looked it over and grinned. "Your place serves traditional Southern." Hers. Asian Latin fusion with molecular foam. That's not competition. That's confusion. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "She can wave paper all she wants," Laurel added, flipping the letter shut. "The food will tell the truth." And that's when I knew, we weren't just rebuilding a diner. We were reclaiming a birthright. I didn't go out of my way to keep tabs on Ember House. But Asheville's not that big, and folks talk. Malik would drop bits here and there. "You hear they put beet foam on catfish last week?" I just shake my head. Some things ought to be left alone. The local food blog, Mountain Bite, posted a review titled, "Style Without Soul." Said the new dishes looked like art school projects and tasted like nothing. One line stuck with me, "Once a warm embrace of Appalachian heritage, Ember House now feels like a cold showroom with good lighting." That one hit deep. Not because it was my restaurant anymore, it wasn't, but because I'd known it when it still had a heartbeat. Turns out, regulars stopped coming. The kind of folks who came in after church or for anniversary dinners didn't care about squid ink glaze or edible balloons. They came for the cornbread, the hush puppies, the smell of hickory in the air. Without that, It was just brick and mortar. Then one rainy afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I wiped my hands on a towel, opened it, and there she was, Jade. Standing there in a coat too thin for the weather, damp hair stuck to her cheeks. Her eyes darted past me, like maybe she thought she could still step back into my kitchen. "We need to talk," she said. I stepped outside, shut the door behind me. "Make it quick." She tried to smile. "Come back. We'll give you creative control again. Equity. Your name on the menu. Whatever it takes." I looked at her for a long second. "You already tore it down. Why come back now?" She faltered. "People miss the original vision." I shook my head. "You didn't buy a vision. You bought a shell." Then she played her last card. "The non-compete still stands." I chuckled, low and quiet. "The food knows the truth, Jade. Yours forgot where it came from. Mine never did." She didn't say another word. Just turned, heels clicking on the wet concrete, and disappeared into the mist. We didn't do a big launch. No press kits, no influencers, no grand opening balloons. Just a chalkboard out front and 12 tables inside. Me in the kitchen, Malik on the line, and Cora back where she belonged, making desserts that tasted like your childhood, if you were lucky enough to have peach cobbler warm from the oven and biscuit sweetened with buttermilk and thyme. We painted the walls a soft tobacco brown, kept my granddad's old stools at the counter. The Ember Grill didn't need a concept. It had a heartbeat. And when we unlocked the doors that first morning, I wasn't sure if anyone would even show. But they did. Not all at once. A couple came in before lunch, curious. Ordered the collards and the pulled pork sandwich. Left with pie and smiles. Then a man and his son said he used to eat here with his dad back when my grandpa ran it. Then 2 women from a local church group. And by that weekend, there was a line forming before we even flipped the "open" sign. Word spread like smoke through dry pine. We didn't advertise. We didn't need to. People came for the fried green tomatoes, for the cornbread that stuck to your ribs, for the feeling that maybe, just maybe, not everything had changed in the world. Every plate we served told a story. And folks listened, with their forks. Then, of course, came the cease and desist. Jade's name was stamped right at the top. Said we were infringing on her brand. Claimed we were appropriating culinary aesthetics associated with Ember House. I dropped it on Laurel's desk. She read it once, snorted, then tore it in half. "She's got no leg to stand on," she said, flipping through our menu. They went fusion. You stayed rooted. She's selling spectacle. You're selling soul. You're not even in the same lane. That night, after the last plate was washed and Cora left with powdered sugar still on her apron, I stood alone in that quiet kitchen. The Ember Grill was alive again. And this time, it was mine. By the 3rd month, folks had stopped talking about Ember House with reverence. Now it was more like a warning. I'd hear things in line at the bank, in the aisles at the grocery store. "You been lately?" Not since they turned hush puppies into little fried spheres on sticks. Bless their hearts, but it's just not the same. Reviews kept dropping. One headline read, "Ember House, from heritage to hype machine." Another called it, "a ghost of its former self." Photos showed empty tables, plates dressed up like modern art, barely touched. The soul had left the building. And soon after, so did the investors. I heard Jade tried to pivot again, brought in a PR team, hosted tastings, even offered a limited-time throwback menu. But it was too late. Folks had already found their way to our door instead. The Ember Grill buzzed with life. Fryers popping, laughter bouncing off the tin ceiling, the bell over the door ringing so often it might as well have been part of the soundtrack. You could smell smoked tomatoes before you hit the porch. Cora's pecan pie was selling faster than we could plate it. Then one afternoon, in the middle of our lunch rush, the room shifted. Not quiet, not loud, just different. Like the air noticed something before we did. I looked up from the pass and saw her. Jade. She stood in the doorway in a sharp gray coat, not a hair out of place, but her eyes were different. Not defiant. Not proud. Just, tired. She didn't say anything. Didn't step inside. She looked around at the full tables. Families laughing. A little boy eating catfish with his fingers. She took in the chaos, the good kind, and then she met my eyes. She gave a small nod. And walked away. 2 weeks later, someone taped a "closed" sign to Ember House's front window. Just like that. No farewell post. No last hurrah. Just gone. It was quiet, the way some endings are. Not with a bang. Just a door shutting one final time. 1 year later, I stood in front of the Ember Grill, hands in my coat pockets, staring at the new sign above the building next door. Same lettering. Same weathered wood. But now it read, the Ember Supper Club. We'd kept the old diner for lunch, fried bologna, meatloaf, and skillet potatoes just the way they used to be. But upstairs, under warm lights and linen tablecloths, we served candlelit dinners, rabbit stew, cornbread stuffed quail, and red-eye gravy poured like velvet over stone-ground grits. Malik ran the line like he was conducting an orchestra. Cora's bourbon caramel bread pudding made grown folks tear up. Business was steady, then booming. Still no ads. Just word of mouth and folks bringing friends. One evening, just before close, I saw my father walk in. He was a quiet man, always had been. Wore the same worn Carhartt jacket, still carried his tools in the back of his truck, even though he retired 2 years back. We hadn't spoken much in a long time, not since I turned down a job at his old firm to chase smoke and recipes. But that night, he sat at the counter, ordered the trout, cleaned his plate, then waited until I was done in the kitchen. No fanfare. Just said, "You made something real here." Then he handed me a weathered envelope. Said he found it in a drawer when cleaning out my grandmother's things. Inside was a folded deed. Yellowed at the edges. Our family's old peach orchard down in Georgia. Land I hadn't set foot on since I was 10. "Maybe it's time," he said, voice low and steady, "we make our own wine." That night, long after everyone left, I poured the last of our blackberry cordial and sat alone under the soft glow of the front lamps. I didn't turn on music. I didn't clean. I just sat there, breathing it all in, the smell of pecan pie, wood smoke, and old floors that creaked like they remembered things. I raised my glass. To memory. To roots. To the fire that never really went out. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was resurrection.